Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is my pleasure to invite you to this wonderful hybrid event hosted by the Education for Development Workgroup. My name is Malva Karvan-Debe. I am a programs manager here at SID-US, and I will be just talking about SID-US a little bit before I hand it off to our speakers for today. So if you are not familiar with us, you'll learn a little bit about us, but if you have been to any of our events, welcome back. We really appreciate it. We are the largest and the most active chapter of the Society for International Development, which is an international network founded in 1957 to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. We serve as a global town square for the international development community, bringing together people from diverse organizations, disciplines, and career stages in a neutral, independent forum to share information and discuss important issues and challenges facing our community, as we are doing today. A few different things to know, different ways that we can get involved with us. You can check out some of our upcoming events and sign up for a weekly newsletter. For everyone in the room, we have a little QR code that you can scan to see what our upcoming events are outside. You can join our virtual career fair. We have a lot of different programming. We have panels, we have professional development sessions happening during the career fair, and it's fully virtual on October 10th. You can apply to be a volunteer co-chair or workgroup or network associate. We have two of our co-chairs here today who you will hear from. And you can also follow us on social media to find out all of our different activities and what we are up to. A few different things to note for today's session. This is a recorded session, and everyone attending in person and virtually will get a recording and other materials after this session. For everyone virtually, closed captioning is available and you can activate it to your own individual settings. If you have any questions for the chat box, and this is for people virtually, please add them in to the chat and we will make sure that the speakers get the questions. If there's a lot of questions, in the interest of time, apologies in advance if we're not able to get to all of them. But we'll try to get you an answer to all of the questions at some point. For everyone joining us virtually and also for everyone in the room that's on the Zoom, if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat box, please do so. We would encourage your name and your organization just so we know who all is joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to Linda Waffey, who is one of our co-chairs for the Education for Development Workgroup.
Thanks. We'll try today to address people on the computer and people in the room. Thank you everybody for being here. As Malavika mentioned, this is an event that's brought to you guys by the Education for Development Working Group. I'm one of the co-chairs and my co-chair Carol will be moderating the event. Today we have an event that touches on a very important part of education. I would say the foundation of education, which is early childhood education. As important as it is something that is sometimes overlooked, underfunded, and in a lot of cases just completely inaccessible to people. And this is why this event is really exciting, because we have some great panelists who have put a lot of thought and effort into thinking about what different options exist to make it a little bit more accessible and a little bit more affordable and possible for people to think about different alternatives. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carol, who's going to be introducing the event and introducing our panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Linda. I appreciate that. So today I'm here. My name is Carol De Silva. I'm here representing the Education for Development Workgroup, and I'm co-chair with Linda. And I'm going to be introducing our two speakers, and I'll also serve as sort of moderator of the questions and answer session for the event as well. And so we will just go ahead and get started, and I will introduce our first speaker. His name is Jan van Ravens. Jan is a senior policymaker and consultant. He's formerly affiliated to the Child Study Center at Yale University. He supported policy development for young children in 30 low and middle income countries in his work. And he has a master's degree in sociology from the State University of Leiden in the Netherlands. So welcome to Jan. And our second speaker is Susan Werner. Susan is a consultant in international early childhood education with over 20 years of experience working throughout the US and overseas. Susan served as a USAID Education Foreign Service Officer and has consulted for ministries of education throughout the Middle East and worked on multiple USAID funded education projects that supported young children and their families in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. And she has a master's degree in education psychology from the University of Auckland, New Zealand. So welcome to you, Susan, as well. All right, so we will go ahead and get started now. We're going to have two presentations. First, Jan will present, and then we will have Susan present. And then I will you present some questions for our panelists to respond to. And then after that, we will have more of an open Q&A for both the people here in the room and the people who are joining online. So that's our agenda for today. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jan.
Thank you so much, Carol. And thank you so much, Society for International Development, for hosting this event. It's really a great honor to be able to do this and to be presenting together with Susan. And thank you so much for the opportunity. The title is The Preschool Entitlement. I will clarify what that is as we go. We start with the bad news, and then the news gets better and better, at least more hopeful all the time. This is the bad news. This slide, and I'm going to show a couple of slides in the beginning, and after that gets more wordy, if you like. This slide shows enrollment in pre-primary education by country income category. As you see low-income countries, the blue line at the bottom. For a very long time, that stayed at about 10%, hardly any growth. Then in the beginning of the century, a slight increase. You would say, well, that's not very much, but it is significant. I will come back to that period. Much more growth in lower middle income countries in that period, beginning of the century. And the gray line, the upper middle income countries, that has been increasing for a longer time. That figure is strongly dominated by developments in China. But there is hidden enrollment. This slide shows children who are 1 year younger than the primary age, the primary entry age. In most countries, these will be the 5-year-olds, right? The circles are the ones who are in preschool, where they should be. And the squares, that's the number of children who are in primary school. They enter too early massively throughout the global south. These are 61 low and middle income countries. Many children of that age are in education. They are learning, but they're in the wrong place. This education is not age appropriate. They repeat grades massively. They drop out, and learning achievement is very low. But they are paid for. That's the point of this message. Look at the blue arrow. That's Cameroon. Very low enrollment in preschool, but almost all children are in education. In Zimbabwe, the red arrow, it's even more significant. There is also hidden enrollment in unregistered preschools. These are preschools that have no registration, no license, no accreditation whatsoever. They are basically illegal. And I came across this when I was working in Uganda. Enrollment was very low, the official enrollment, but there was a lot of stories about small and illegal preschools. And people said, well, it's really a big trend. And there's a way of estimating this. In 21, this is Uganda. I'm going to show you this for a couple of other countries more. In 2011, that was the time that I was there, only 6% was enrolled. That's the blue one. And there was some increase to 2016. But the red bar, that is the measurement from a household survey. And that measures not only the official preschools, but also the unofficial ones. And the gap is huge. 40% of the children in Uganda at that time were actually learning. It decreased a little bit towards 2016. If we go to Nigeria, there's an indication, it's all very incomplete, those data, because these household surveys, they get repeated only every 4 or 5 years. But it gives an indication of a more recent year, 2021. Still very high, 35%. And so you wonder, when did it start? Well, Senegal gives an idea of when it started. In 2000, both were very low, official enrollment, but even those unregistered kindergarten. So it really started to increase at the beginning of this century. That is consistent with the increase of GDP growth in low-income countries, the lower middle-income countries. It is consistent with the accelerated decrease of poverty rates, especially extreme poverty. And it's also consistent, I go back very quickly, with this slight increase from between 2000 and 2020. But the problem is, there's no longer increases. There's really flattening curves, and it started before COVID. We cannot blame it on COVID. It started earlier. It's not caused by the crisis in 2008, because in 2008, you can see there was still a lot of growth. So we don't know what it caused. But we know it's better than the official figures suggest. And now for the last of the data slides, I'm going to advise you to fasten your seatbelts, because this is about preschool attendance in 4 peri-urban settlements in 2014. Study by Innovation for Poverty Action. And it's a survey, right? It's again not the official data, but the survey. Just ask parents, is your child going to a preschool regularly? And this is it, extremely high. And these are peri-urban settlements. I don't like the word slum, but that's what it is. The poorest of the poorest people in the world. And the average is as high as high income countries. And I was completely struck by those data when I first saw them. And I was actually humbled. I think this is the fashionable way of saying it nowadays. Because through these data, there are millions of people in the world who are sending a message to us, the policymakers and the policy advisors and the researchers. And that message is, we can't wait for you. No, we can't wait for your policies. It's great you're working on this, but we can't wait for it. We don't need policies, we need childcare. And so we do it ourselves. However, we are still talking about the poorest of the poorest people. So they have an income, they have a job, they have a livelihood, more than 20 years ago, right? But they don't have much. So the fees are very low and the quality is extremely low, right? But it's important, and you can't say that those data, the underage enrollment in primary school and the unregistered kindergarten, can be seen as a possibility for a game change in preschool education. Because we can see that families and governments are already spending a lot on early learning, much more than we thought. Because the families, parents appear to have the need and the means for childcare, though the fees are low and so is quality. And the governments are really spending a lot of money on underage enrollment, grade repetition, dropout. It's extremely inefficient, but they are spending. So this is the game change. Universal preschool is no longer a daunting funding challenge. I mean, we still need money and it's going to be challenging, but it's not that we say, oh my God, how are we ever going to find those resources? No, there's more than we think. It's a policy challenge. It's us, the policymakers, that need to make smarter policies in order to better allocate the existing financial flows. And how can we make use of that chain? Now, this is our line of thought. And when you say our, I am talking about 5 authors of this publication by RTI. One of them is in the room. That's Elisa Hardwick. Hi, Elisa. The others are Catherine King from RTI, Louis Crouch also from RTI, though retired from it, and Carlos Arjonian from Argentina. We thought the following. Let's distinguish 2 main functions of preschool: child development and childcare. Child development means that in all cases, no exceptions, all children must develop to their full potential, as we say nowadays, and be ready for school. That's the child development function. The child care function is much more practical. Parents need to go to work, study, or volunteer, and during for an X number of hours per day, they need to hand over their children. We're not going to separate those functions. On the contrary, the whole point of the plan is that we're going to make one of the functions work for the other, but that's later on. But we distinguish them. If we just focus on the child development function, we know from school effectiveness research, preschool effectiveness research, and it's great to have Susan who can say much more about that, that there's an absolute minimum of 2.5 hours of preschool education per day to have an effect. You can't go below 2 hours. And it has to be regularly throughout the year. You can't say, let's do it 3 months a year. Although some countries actually do that now, but it has to be throughout the year. And then there's a whole range of additional quality criteria that you should meet. It's not that you say, okay, 2.5 hours and that's fine, but we'll come to that. Okay. So we say 3 hours per day, 5 days per week, 40 weeks per year. Is that arbitrary? Yes, it's very arbitrary. But sometimes it's good to be a little bit straightforward, because if you have a number, and it's basically 600 hours per year, if you have a number, you can start making some policy. You can estimate the cost, you can estimate the number of teachers that you need, given a certain, student-child ratio, etc. So, okay, let's give us a break. 600 hours, okay, let's think with that a little bit further. And you can say that this is a public good, something that governments should secure for all. It's implied in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Actually, there's an initiative going on to make it more explicit, optional protocol, as it's called. I'd like to go back to 1948, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's a shame I have to look it up, but there it says that education must be free in the elementary and fundamental stages. Well, if preschool is not part of the fundamental stages, then what is? And that declaration also said in 1948, education, in terms of the objectives for education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. Nowadays, we phrase it slightly differently. We say children must develop to their full potential. That is the motto nowadays, right, for preschool. But what's the difference? So it's really, we're not really advocating something wild. It's something to which children have a right ever since 1948. Okay, so that's the child development function. Now, the child care function. Obviously, if you have a full day job or even a half day job, 3 hours is not enough. But if you say, well, you need full daycare and for free, it's going to be difficult because it's so much more expensive. Because there's more hours and you need the meals and the dormitory. And in practice, there are only a few countries in the world where you can find free daycare for the whole day. These are countries with a large government budget as a share of GDP. That's a complicated way of saying that these are usually communist and socialist countries. And as far as they still exist, and the countries with a social democrat tradition. Mm-hmm. You see it in Scandinavia, you see it in France, Italy, Spain. But what I'm trying to say is that you can't achieve that overnight, because you need to change the whole culture of the country. That's going. I hope it happens. I hope one day that we have governments to say, yes, this is really something we need to do, but it takes time. So what can we do? What we can do is the preschool entitlement. This is the policy instrument that we are proposing as authors of that application by RTI. This ensures that children attend 600 hours of quality preschool in 2 or 3 years preceding primary school. Yeah. Plus a whole range of quality criteria that it should be met. Keep repeating that. This will cost only 0.2% of GDP in middle-income countries. This is important because it is not unsurmountable. Most middle-income countries can afford that. It's not a big step. It's not going to, 0.7, 1%, which you would need if you did full daycare for free. Low-income countries are going to be a little bit harder. And the preschool entitlement facilitates initiatives, and I will tell you how that works, by multiple stakeholders to expand this program from 3 hours to half day, full day, for those parents who need it. Not for all, but for those who need it. Now, this raises a couple of questions. Why do we make that distinction between 3 hours and extra hours? And why would the government ensure the 3 hours, but facilitate the latter? And how does it work? This is how it works. First of all, we say introduce rigorous accreditation to ensure the quality of the 3-hour program. The criteria for accreditation all come from what we know from the literature, and Susan is going to talk about it a lot more, of what determines quality in teaching and learning. What are the inputs? What are the quality, the competency requirements for teachers? What is a good curriculum? What are the learning materials that you need? safety requirements, hygiene, etc. On the condition of accreditation, and that this is crucial, keep emphasizing that, make it an open system. You can say that any organization, and this is a bit revolutionary, any organization that meets the criteria may provide a 600-hour program and receive the per capita subsidy, which makes it a free service for all children. The system is not only therefore open to traditional providers, so like public and private preschools, primary schools who want to start a preschool. This is an important development in Kenya, but also to non-traditional providers. This is where it gets a little bit strange, like local communities, employers, trade unions, agricultural cooperatives, associations, village markets, authorities, NGOs, faith-based organizations like the local mosque, the church, or a temple. So these actors, some in the role of provider and some stakeholder, they can then co-finance additional hours on top of the 3 hours in dialogue with the parents. You need an example, because otherwise you probably don't know how it works. Imagine there's in some country, in the global south, in a village, a hamlet, maybe a small town, there's a large farm, and where many young parents are working. They have children in the age range of 3 to 6, and there's a mosque or a church or a temple or a synagogue that understands the problem of the need for childcare. And for a number of years, this mosque, the people who operate it, they have been trying to create a facility for those children of 3 to 6, but they could not finance it sustainably, because where do you get the money from? So this is the story of the global south for many years. Frustration, you make an attempt, there may be an NGO who finances and helps it for a number of years, but then it stops. There may be a benevolent person who wants to subsidize it for a number of years, and then the person goes away or decedes. But with the preschool entitlement, the mosque would be certain, at the very least, that it can hire a qualified teacher for at least 3 hours per day using this per child subsidy. If the mosque runs a program that meets the criteria for the accreditation, it will get for each child per month or per year or per term a certain amount of money. And this is certain. So the municipality could then join hands with the mosque and the farmer to build classrooms and hygiene facilities, because they have confidence in the longevity. And those 4 words are the key of the whole program, the confidence in the longevity. I mean, the municipality, they can join hands with anybody anyway, right? For a long time, they don't need the government for that. Same goes for the mosque and the farmer. They can make any plans, whatever they like, but they won't do it unless there is a basis of certainty of the longevity. The farmer then could hire the teacher for a couple of hours more. It's not going to be so expensive because the teacher's already paid for the first 3 hours. The parents, they can chip in to hire the teacher for a couple of hours more, or they can share costs with the farmer. The parents, and this is where it really gets creative, can take turns standing the children in the afternoon. You may think, wait a minute, parents are not qualified teachers, right? But if you look at a childcare program of maybe 8 hours per day, you will see that only a few hours of those hours are really teaching. The rest is really looking after children. It's not that I say that anybody can do it, but you don't really need the qualifications of a fully qualified teacher. And this is very interesting because there is such there's an incredible shortage of teachers. Then the mosque or the church or an NGO could say, wait a minute, that's interesting. We see those parents attending these children as part-time classroom assistants. With just a little bit of training, they could be doing a much better job already. They don't have to be qualified teachers right away, but you know, it's not that expensive to make that difference. And then finally, and this is where the government is lacking, the government could create a pathway from assistant to qualified preschool teachers. It will become a pathway into the profession. Because one of the main bottlenecks into expanding preschool education in underserved areas It's not only money, not so much money, but scarcity of teachers. And not only scarcity, but scarcity of young boys and girls who have the qualifications even to enter teacher training. Because let's face it, to enter an official teacher training college, you need at least primary school plus a number of years of secondary education. That varies from country to country, but you need some. Well, there are areas in the world where even these people are scarce. So what you can see, and here at Plan International, but Plan Save the Children, they have a whole tradition of running early child, community-based early child development centers, where they are developing these creative pathways into the profession. They work with local girls, local women to train them up. So the whole plan of the preschool entitlement is not out of the blue. It's really a composition of all kinds of ideas that all of the 5 offices have gathered, and we put it all together in one framework, basically. So this is only one example. In the publication, you find more examples. The parents, I've already covered this. They will still pay a fee, but it's strongly mitigated by the contribution from various stakeholders. By the fact that the first 3 hours are free, use of existing spaces, all kinds of synergies, creative approaches to human resource development. And to conclude, if I still have the time, otherwise I can skip this one. Yeah. To conclude, what we see, what we envision as authors, is an open preschool system. And I'd like to make a sidestep. There is more, there's increasing interest in the plan. I'm in contact with a bureau from South Africa, Genesis Analytics, who are interested in this. And their motto is unlock value. And I thought this is a really great value because it emphasizes that there's a lot of energy already, a lot of funding already, a lot of will among parents already to create a preschool system. And all you need is a government intervention, which is small, affordable, and unlocks that value, unlocks the potential which is already in the population. So an open system, close to the people and locally adaptable. Rather than rolling out a single standard preschool model across the country, you know, as we have seen a lot of times in primary school, one model and this is what it looks like, and even buildings are the same. We see preschool education expanding through a flexible approach and an open system with space for local actors who can take the initiative to start as preschool and shape it according to local needs and preferences. The example with the monks and the farmer is one example, but with semi-nomadic groups, you will have to have a mobile kindergarten. There are great examples of that. You may need, for instance, a local market. You may need a program for the first half of the day because the other half of the day, the mothers may be working at home in their vegetable garden. I'm not sure, but if that's the local way of working, then you need to adapt the program to that way of living. In this way, the economic need for childcare and the benefits of it, they would function as a driving force to expand preschool. So I began by distinguishing the two functions, childcare and child development. But the trick is to make one work for the other. And this could help finally to address the loss of development potential in 200 million children. A couple of years ago, The Lancet published an article that's demonstrated that no less than 200 million children in the world, and I apologize, I know that this is stock or flow, but I should have looked that up, sorry. But that's a lot in any case, 200 million children. And this is a huge number that needs to be addressed, and preschool education can help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan, for that presentation. I'm sure everyone has got lots of questions, but we're going to hold questions for now. Make sure you write them down, keep them fresh in your mind. And we're going to hear from Susan Werner now, and then after that, we'll be able to ask some questions.
Up to you. Thank you.
just waiting for the slide deck to pop up.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Jan. And thank you everyone here in this room, and thank you for this opportunity to come and talk about improving, and I've actually titled it Improving Early Childhood Care and Education, and that focuses on both pre-primary, which is really those years leading up to right before primary school starts, but also looking bigger into really birth through 6, I'd say. And as we know, the UN Development Goal 4 really focuses on providing access, but and also providing quality. And in target 4.2, which talks about ensuring that all boys and girls have access to quality early childhood development care and pre-primary education so that they are ready for primary education. And really, in a sense, thinking about what are children experiencing from the time they arrive to the time they leave in all of those settings that they are in. Okay, so quality, and why does it matter? Question really is are we preparing children both for school, but also for life? And so when I think about quality, we talk a lot about terms like, are children developmentally on track? Do children get school readiness skills? But it's really, do children have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be successful? And that includes skills like fine motor skills so that they can learn how to write, but it also includes things like cognitive skills, problem-solving skills, language skills, physical skills, language literacy, cognitive, social emotional skills. And so it's skills preparing for school, but it is also thinking about how do we prepare children for life. And so really when we think about what is the purpose of programs and what is the opportunity before us in each of these environments as a community, it's how are we preparing every child that is here for school to be successful and to be successful citizens in our community. So when we think about quality, we think about quality on multiple dimensions. So one piece we think about is structural quality, which is really about the learning environment itself, the physical space. Are there materials and resources here? Are there teachers here who are trained and certified? Are there, what's the ratio? Is it one teacher for 100 kids? Is it one teacher for 30 kids? That's a very different environment. So structural quality really talks about the kind of logistics of the space itself. Process quality is about the interactions. What do I experience as a child in that environment? Do I feel safe? Do I feel nurtured? What am I experiencing in my interactions, both with my peers and with the teacher themselves? And that's what we think about with process quality. So we think about structural quality. We also think about that process quality, which also lends to pedagogy and what's going on in the classroom itself. Cultural and contextual relevance is huge, right? What an early childhood classroom, and we think about quality in Senegal, it's going to look, and even in different parts of Senegal, it's going to look very different than what it's going to look like in other environments. So we're really thinking about how do I define quality here in my community and creating that shared vision for what does quality look like is very important. And the other really another piece in thinking about quality is that piece around what are my goals for children? Okay, what do I want children at the end of this year before they start primary school? If I'm in that last year before children start primary school, what knowledge, skills, and abilities do I want them to leave my room with? Okay, if I'm a classroom teacher. And so thinking about having those goals and being very clear about what are our goals that are very holistic, right? We think about school readiness goals, but we really think holistically, social emotional goals, cognitive goals, physical goals, language goals, literacy goals. What are all of those goals for development and learning to set every child up for success? Okay, so thinking about quality, and as Jan talked about, we have public programs out there. We also have a lot of private providers that really, those same definition of quality can and should apply across the different types of providers. So if I'm a provider in a mosque, if I'm a large provider in the middle of a downtown setting, a city center versus being in a rural setting, that I'm thinking about quality that really transcends across the types of providers. It's also really important to think about in early childhood education. Often we come from a straight education piece, and often what happens if US government funding, we're in silos, right? US government goes out and funds education programs. But I, as a child, when I show up, I'm a whole child. So for example, if I'm in rural Zambia and I do not have access to food and I'm malnourished, and that's affected my cognitive development, you can have the best early childhood curriculum in the world. But actually, if I'm malnourished and that's affecting my cognitive skills, you're not going to get the outcomes you want. And so really thinking about quality, you actually have to take a multi-sectoral approach in terms of how you support programs to support every child. Okay, so here's some of the current challenges about providing quality in lower middle income countries. Inadequate funding. Okay, funding for teachers, funding for spaces, funding for training for teachers. So that is a huge challenge. Limited human resources, and that includes teachers, teachers that are trained and educated. It also includes government, it also includes people who are designing trainings, people in higher education, academics that are studying early childhood education, people to help really create that shared vision of what quality looks like in this context. Also, very limited information and data. So when you ask them about how many programs are you that are currently operating, there's very limited information and data around what's operating throughout lower and middle income countries. And as Jan mentioned, there's high rates of private provision that often governments do not have a lot of information about what do their programs look like, what's going on in those programs. Decentralized governance, again, lends itself to not having a good line of sight into what's going on in programs across country, and then a lack of coordination between different types of programs, lack of coordination between sectors, so with health, with nutrition, and other sectors, and just a lack of coordination, again, thinking about it at the national government, then with your subnational government and local communities. And that lack of coordination itself also impacts quality and is a challenge. Okay, so improving quality. So if you were to put into 4 buckets, I actually think the authors here, Elizabeth Spear at AIR and the team here really put into 4 beautiful buckets in terms of how do we really improve quality in early childhood care and education settings. One is creating a shared vision of quality and a motivation to provide it for all children. And that includes children with disabilities. It includes children from minority populations and marginalized groups. We've seen a couple really beautiful examples where communities have come together to create that shared vision. I'm going to provide 2 examples. They're both from high-income countries, so I apologize for that. One is in New Zealand, they've done a lot of work really trying to incorporate Indigenous voices into that shared vision of what quality looks like. It's one of the better examples I've seen. Back in the 80s and 90s, they did a whole consultation process and put Māori, the largest Indigenous group within New Zealand, really as the focal point in driving that process for creating that shared vision. So what came out of that was a document, which was a curriculum framework called Tabariki, which literally means a woven mat. And it was this idea that I'm inviting everyone into my home on this woven mat. And this is a curriculum framework for programs around what high quality early childhood looks like. Okay, and that's one example of where an Indigenous group was really invited to kind of lead that process. A second example I'm going to provide is actually from Reggio Emilia in northern Italy. It's quite a well-known example where after World War II, the community came together and said, how do we raise global citizens? And here this community had been decimated by World War II, and they came together and said, how do we create citizens for tomorrow? And then for the next generation, and really asking that question as the driver for creating what does a quality early childhood experience look like is another example of how communities can do that. Okay, so the second piece, it really is about having an amazing, qualified and motivated teacher workforce. If you think about your own education, along the way, I'm sure you had some amazing teachers, and you probably had some not so amazing teachers. But really, how do we create a qualified and motivated workforce is integral to having a high quality early childhood care and education system. creating appropriate infrastructure, and that means having spaces, right? Spaces where children can meet and with staff. Also having teaching and learning resources for teachers. And often you can see examples where teachers can access things in their local community, whether it's bottle caps, other pieces that they can use to create manipulative so children can learn fine motor skills, numeracy skills, using materials and resources in their community, but they do need to be able to access those materials. And the final piece is around having stable and flexible financing. That is so that spaces are paid for, they need to be paid for. Teachers are paid. We see a lot of volunteer teachers in early childhood settings in lower and middle income countries, and really bringing them into being paid, and ideally paid parity for primary schools, I think is a great space to work for to keep teachers in the workforce. So how do you improve it? One issue is around prioritization. You can't do everything at once. And one thing is there's a lot of variability across lower and middle income countries in terms of what currently is available, in terms of, are there standards created for what quality should look like? Is there that shared vision? Are there, what does it look like, and how do you prioritize where you go first? Because there's so many different needs. You've got to choose a path, but also establish targets along that way. So if you say, I want to have all my teachers receive a early childhood credential in the next 10 years, then along the way you'd have targets to say, in 2 years, I want this percentage of teachers to have that credential. In 5 years, I want 50% of teachers. And in 10 years, I'm going to have 100% of teachers that have that credential. So you need to have established targets along that way while you set your priorities. Having strong governance with multi-sectoral coordination is key. And that really is from the top national government to say, this is what we believe in early childhood, this is what it looks like, and then really thinking about how do we communicate what a strong early childhood looks like, and also then how do we manage the system. And really that requires having data. Okay, and so as I said, having a mapping, really knowing what's out there. How do we set up regulations so that programs become registered or accredited? Jan talked about accreditation, and that's key, is that I, as a program, have 3 teachers. These teachers have the qualifications. I am now licensed to teach. And so really having a very strong data system within the education management information systems is crucial. The other piece, and these 3 bullet points all linked together, is really this idea around having national standards, right? Me determining what having early learning development standards. I'm going to talk about this in a future slide, but thinking about what does quality look like, and that shared vision, and that really comes to our standards, right? We have standards of what early childhood programming should be doing. We also have standards of what we think children should know and be able to do. Okay, strengthening the workforce is key. And then really thinking about, are we providing equitable access to every child, and what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean for children with disabilities? What does that mean for children in crisis and conflict? And what does that mean for children from minority groups? Okay, so we talked already about both structural and process quality. Both those, in order to address them, we need to set standards, and those standards, for example, will say, can be teacher-child ratios, can be that teachers receive a certain amount of training, and also around teacher pay. It's also important for us to set up programs for making sure that we have training for teachers. Okay, so how do we develop those standards? And that really, across lower middle income countries, there's a lot of variety out there. Some countries, so for example, Senegal has just gone through a process where they updated their early learning and development standards. And those are standards that say, I believe that at the age of 4, child should have these knowledge, skills, and abilities, and that's across domains. So cognitive skills, looking at motivation, persistence, ability to engage, looking at the language skills, looking at cognitive, social, emotional skills, physical skills. And so looking at the whole child, that, for example, I'm giving Senegal as an example because I've reviewed them recently, they have set that out, and that's been updated. And those things do need to be updated based based on research. And unfortunately, most of the research does come from high-income countries. And so there's a need for a lot more research as well, and having a research agenda in lower and middle income countries. The other types of standards often are service quality. So what it should look like in the classroom, and these can be regulations. You know, what does it look like, and then what do we expect those programs to do all day? And so that's also developed. And then here was a graphic developed by Michelle Newman, looking at what are the steps to think about when you're developing standards at the national level. And those standards really are, what does quality look like? And I'm establishing what quality should look like here across Zambia. Okay, quality assurance systems are operated usually at the national level. It's really this thinking about how do we ensure quality? We can tell you to go do something, but then you can say, okay, I'm going to go do it. How do I know that it's good? And how do I help you improve? So quality assurance systems are the way that I monitor, a way that feedback loops are very important to quality assurance systems. Being able to provide feedback, a big challenge is that often when people go out to do inspections in early childhood settings, often there are inspectors who also do inspections in primary school settings. So are they then basically using the same lens that you would use in a primary school setting for what quality looks like in an early childhood setting? Have they been educated? So making sure that we actually highly effectively set standards for what quality looks like. Do we have a trained workforce, a trained force of coaching that can really help support and identify issues, so that we ourselves know what we need to educate people on? And are we providing feedback to teachers, feedback to leaders in those programs to really help that quality improvement system? The other piece I really want to talk about is are those standards and are those guidelines clear to programs? So often you will see, I don't say often, but I will say you will see examples where federal government will set standards, and then you will ask early childhood teachers. There was some research done by Abby Rakes in a group that looked across sub-Saharan Africa, and one thing they found was that even when countries did have standards for quality, teachers actually had no access to them, and teachers didn't know what they looked like. And so it's really important that those standards are communicated both to local governments, but also to the teachers themselves. Okay, and that is very clear, it's very transparent, that everyone has that information, that I know as a teacher what quality looks like and what I'm expected to do every day with children. And if I'm not doing that, that there's someone to help me, to coach me. So quality assurance systems really can help in that coaching process of helping me to coach me, to help me improve my practice every day. Quality assurance systems also can help with accreditation, licensing, and registration, helping to really identify our programs up to snuff. Okay, are they providing quality? And if they're not, how do we incentivize them to do so? Sometimes they're punitive, sometimes they don't. And they can be punitive, and that is something that happens. And but are there ways to incentivize and to really promote quality improvement within programs themselves? And there are examples where in the United States where information can be shared publicly and parents then choose, this program's accredited, I'm going to send my child to this program because it's received a certain accreditation. Mm-hmm. And then parents have a choice. Often parents may not have choices if there's something only close by. And so that may not work as well in certain environments, but really making sure that that process is linked to national standards and guidelines is critical. Okay. Teacher education, this is something that's actually really been primary in my own work around teacher education, is that it must be specialized, it must be practical. I as a teacher must leave that program knowing what I'm supposed to do and really having the tools to be effective every day with young children. How do I support children to develop all the knowledge, skills, and abilities that I expect them to leave my program with? What should that look like every day? Okay. And what does that look like in terms of, there are certain things in. Thank you. Which does it look like? Teacher pay is a huge important piece. Volunteer teachers leads to higher rates of absenteeism and leads to teacher retention issues. Ideally, that we will move to a system where teachers are paid on pay parity with primary school teachers. And that we also have resources for teachers available so that they can be effective every day in their job. And so really, this comes out of the pre-primary note published by USAID, really about this importance of the teaching workforce and how structural quality related to teacher competence relates to process quality, the quality of my interactions with children relates to better child outcomes. If I'm a stronger teacher, and this is actually, I think, the most important thing is having strong teachers and really thinking about teacher-child interactions. I'm a strong teacher. My children in my class are much more likely to gain the knowledge, skills, and abilities they need to be effective and successful in school and in life. And I wanted to finish with my final word, my final thought, and this comes from Yuri Bronfenbrenner's Systems of Ecological Theory Systems, which is the idea that children are at the center. And we really have to think about the child at the center of what we do. And if the child is at the center of what we're doing, and our goal is to support children to thrive today, tomorrow, and in 20 years from now, if I'm thinking about what does success look like, what does quality look like, I'm thinking about if I meet that child in 20 years and that child is now 23, 24 years old, what knowledge, skills, and abilities, what do I want that child to be like? What skills should they have? So what do I need to do to support that child in my classroom every day at the age of 2, 3, 4, and 5? And it really does take a village. And so in thinking about this system, right, having coordination and cooperation, both from the top of the system, meaning our federal government, to my local governance is key. And having clarity in terms of what's expected, knowing what quality looks like is key. But also thinking about the other pieces of that system around that I am a whole child and that I need to make sure that thinking about health, nutrition, all of those pieces come together as we support the whole child. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that presentation. So and we have about 30 minutes left for conversation. I have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask of our presenters, and then we'll open it up for questions from the group here and folks online. So I'm going to set up a little kind of black and white scenario here, which is, Jan, your presentation talked quite a bit about quantity, right? Expansion, getting more children into schools, getting more schools out there to provide, preschool education. And Susan, you talked a little bit more about quality. So what should be happening in those schools and what kind of vision do we have for what children are going to be learning and what kind of skills they'll develop when they're in these schools. So my question is, thinking about those two sides, obviously I would guess that both of you would say both are important, right? But when we think about, scarce resources and all of the many competing priorities that ministries of education have, what would you advise education stakeholders to spend their time and money on? Expanding access or improving quality of existing preschools?
Susan?
Well, I think as Jan showed, there's already a lot going on out there. So I personally am going to argue for, and it depends on the context. I'd have to go and look at what information is available in that context. But I would push for teacher education as a big piece in looking at quality itself. Since we've already seen that there's a lot of access already out there that has not been accounted for. There's a lot of miscounting. I would push for quality, and I think that the idea is that if we're setting children into school, we're funneling them into the school system, we already know that they don't have the skills. Why are we going to keep doing what we're doing? Even if we provide greater access, but we're still not preparing children, what's the point?
John?
Well, I'm inspired by the fact that we are here in the offices of Plan International. Because Plan International and Save the Children, Aga Khan Foundation, BRAC, the Bangladesh NGO, they have a great way of reconciliating the two. If they start a preschool, usually they will call it an early childhood development center, etc. In an area where there's nothing, where there's no qualified teachers, but not even girls and boys who are qualified to go to official teacher training. If you start really from zero, they have a great approach, a transition period of about 4 years. They start talking with the community, they set up a community management committee. They begin training some of the girls and the women. They will start at some point the provision of the program, but under heavy guidance from a couple of professionals that have been doing it a couple of times before. It's sort of a team that goes around the whole country. And as you progress through 4 years, then the quality goes up. It starts at a very low level, but there's guidance so that nothing can go wrong. And as the people get better, as they get better at managing the program, as they get better at teaching, as they get better at attending the children, the coaching and the guidance gets less intensive. And after 4 years, they will say, after an assessment, they may say, okay, this new community-based ECD center can now be on its own. There may still be guidance and regular quality assessments, but this is how they resolve it. And of course, that was also a question that came to our minds when we made this quite ambitious plan of the preschool entitlement. If you say, as the first statement, there has to be rigorous accreditation, and at the same time you say there has to be expansion, then you got a problem, because these are contrary requirements. You know, it would be tempting to say, okay, let's forget about quality for a while, let's expand, and then if we got more children in, then we'll see about quality. That's how it really happens in most schools. But we say no, upfront accreditation needs to be there. However, we see a period of leniency, we call it, I believe, of 4 years, where you can start with a provisional accreditation on the condition of guidance, and gradually you're on your own. And I think that's the way of reconciling the tension that you mentioned, Christine. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Now we've solved all that problem.
Yeah.
So everyone knows how to respond to it. So kind of a follow-up question, a very similar question. And you both kind of touched on it a little bit, and you mentioned, for example, making sure to be inclusive, including children maybe who have disabilities or other populations, nomadic populations and what have you. But again, I think when we're thinking about how governments can spend their time and money and where they can make the most impact, there's often a tension that comes up when we're talking about equity as well. And so I think there's also implications when we're thinking about equity, there's implications for standard setting, right? Or making sure that there is kind of a unified vision when in fact you could have a highly diverse population that has very, very different needs. So how does equity kind of figure into this vision that both of you are presenting in terms of expansion of early childhood education or preschool education and the quality of early childhood education?
I would say that equity could be part of the quality standards. and therefore you're part of the accreditation process. So in the ideal world, as I see it, but I admit it's difficult. In the ideal world, I would say we don't provide an accreditation unless the new provider has a plan, has accepts the obligation of making sure they include all the children. They need to do child mapping. Now it's a standard process already where a preschool organization scans the whole neighborhood, make sure that, I mean, it's a literal, I've seen maps on the wall, child, right? Literally, right? So that could be a requirement. We don't give you any money unless we see that map on the wall, that you are actually having every child in the picture, literally. And it remains difficult. However, one of the things on our plan that may help is the fact that there's a per child subsidy for every child. Whether that's a rich child or a poor child, it's the same amount of money. And that's an incentive to the provider to say, okay, let's try to get all those children on board. It's a bit of a hard way of doing it, but it may work. Yeah. That's because it's right. That's why it's called the preschool entitlement. Everybody's entitled to it. Yeah.
One thing I want to add, so I agree with Jan that having data and knowing who's out there and making sure that we're serving all of them is critical. Giving in support to teachers, giving them a toolbox that helps them to be able to adapt to include children with special needs, for example, children with disabilities. So how do I just saw some beautiful examples of this last year when I was in Senegal, of a child with disability in a classroom, and the teacher actually brilliantly was able to engage that child in learning while they also have a very large class of students, and giving teachers in their toolbox, in their training, supporting them to support every child. Another way is really depending on the level of need, for example, so children with severe disabilities may not be able to be served in certain environments. How do we create programs to support those children as well? Mm-hmm. And so I think really, first of all, having data and seeing what's out there, knowing what's out there and how do we serve everyone that's out there, making sure that they're being served. A great way is to incentivize, but really teacher education is a critical piece in all of this. And really when we define quality, thinking about how we're supporting each of these.
Great, thank you very much for those responses, very thoughtful. I would like to open it up now to questions in the room, or I don't know if we have a question online. No questions online for the moment, okay? So is there anyone here in the room? I have a whole long list of questions I could ask, but I'll pause to see if there's anyone in the room who would like to ask. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm Fiona Arbov. I work with Oxfam International's DC advocacy team, and we actually are based in DC and right across the street from our target institutions, the World Bank, IMF, and the IFC. I actually have been leading our charge more locally as well as globally to, I guess, investigate the impacts of the childcare initiative, which is a new program co-designed by and co-funded through a very innovative financing model, which includes donor partners from governments as well as private sector, as well as the bank itself. And I am by no means a childcare expert, but when it comes to policy, I've been looking through a more gendered lens of how childcare should, not only can, but also should intersect with gender disparities, not only in terms of social norms and attitudes around care work and unpaid care, underpaid care, but also in terms of the working conditions of the care workers and care providers who are most often, in a great majority, women and or girls. And so I think one aspect that I found challenging from both presentations actually was the gender blindedness. With your presentation, Jan, I was thinking about, even in more community-based or local settings, like working with mosques or working with faith groups, there are inherent gender biases that are operationalized in the day-to-day lives of the provision of that childcare. But even when we look at on a national level through like legal architecture around land rights, securing rights for women entrepreneurs or women to actually lead and facilitate the care provision is quite difficult because the law does not work for them, it works against them. And then on top of that, when we think about wages, I think systematically wages for care workers are always the lowest in even in the formal labor sector because again of gender biases and norms. So I think it is really critical to think not only at the quality level, quantity level, provision levels, and through a gender specific lens when designing these programs and advising policy instruments to governments. So I guess my first question in response to that would be, how can we approach ECCE through an intersectional lens and approach? And then the second, just more brief comment, I was thinking about the potential from approaching childcare through the human rights lens is the opportunity to engage other SDGs, including around poverty, inequality, et cetera, and of course, gender, which I already touched on. When it comes to the IFIs and in particular the World Bank, we have been fighting for over a decade and finally secured a win where the IFC has decided to divest from and pause all future investments in K through 12 commercial education. That does not include pre-K education. And I would argue that unless we address the terms of the provision, again, also in terms of the financing terms, we risk locking in wealth-based inequalities, which is ultimately, again, the whole point of why we're doing this. And so it's critical that government financing for universal childcare or preschools also have to include guardrails and safeguards, and particularly taking this inequality and wealth and income inequality lens in the design. And so my second question, how do we effectively advocate with governments and financiers of childcare through a human rights lens that also targets and challenges systemic inequality?
Wonderful. Both very rich questions, and one of them was on my list, so I'm glad you asked it.
Do you want to start?
Please.
Okay, I'm actually going to start with that second question first. Financing is a great question around how do we make sure that we are providing enough money within the system into programs, especially programs that are in lower income areas, right? And so in a sense, that is part of how the government sets its standards, right? When the government sets its financing system at the government national level, is how do they create a system where they're providing additional funding into programs for that are in lower income areas. So there are examples out there where governments have been, like actually thinking about two different education systems. Actually, I'm going to talk about just in high income countries. So if you look at the United States, schools are often done based on property taxes, right? And school systems are funded based on the property taxes. If you go to New Zealand, schools are based on the government of New Zealand itself does an equation for every single school. And it looks at the socioeconomic status of that community. And so it's actually an inverse relationship. The richest schools in New Zealand get the least amount of funds from the government with the assumption that parents pay more money. And the poorest schools in New Zealand, and this is done at the national level. Now, New Zealand's only a country of 5 million people. It's small, it's 2 islands, it's easier for them to do this. And they actually have a specific equation. They've done this for the last 30, 40 years, where it's actually each school is given a rating, and government funding is in a relationship directly towards the socioeconomic level of that community and that school. And that exists in their K-12 model. You could apply a similar type of principle into an early childhood space. I think the New Zealand approach is one model of financing that creates much more equity. And there is in New Zealand though, the challenge is that there's an assumption that parents will give money. Parents who have money will give money to those schools. Those schools in the richest communities, those parents will actually give money even though it's a public government school. Okay, so that's one possible idea of how a government could tackle that. With regards to gender, your first question in early childhood, the field is very heavily women dominated. And early childhood teachers generally, and I'd say this across the globe, both in high income countries and in lower middle income countries, are paid a lot less than primary school teachers, secondary school teachers, and in most places more than a civil servant, right? So there's a huge amount of problem. There's a huge problem around keeping people in the field, hiring great people, keeping people in the field. And when men have been supported in the field, one big challenge is that they don't stay in the classroom very long. Men will go into leadership positions because that's where there's more money. And that has been a challenge in the field of early childhood care and education. So it's a great thing around how do we support this sector to be more well-funded so that in my dream world, early childhood teachers are paid at parity, not only with just primary and secondary schools, but in a sense with government, with public servants, right? How do we raise that money? And that is a challenge in the space. I cannot answer that today in the next 30 minutes, but that is a great question.
I don't have a great answer to your question, Fiona. Let me just say that up front. We did assume in our calculations that preschool teacher will get equal pay compared to primary school teachers. And since they're predominantly female, it would be some kind of a leveling, predominantly male teachers in some countries in primary school. What I do want to point out, and this is a slightly better answer, though I'm still not very enthusiastic. The idea is also by the combination of preschool education and childcare, the fact that one helps the other, linking the two will increase both. The World Bank recently published, I think, 3 studies about childcare more in particular, showing the big impact of on female economic independence. And so we hope that this is also an impact from our plan. If childcare is more widely available, it will help, the position of the economic position of women. But that's a hope. It's not a guarantee. No.
Any responses to that or additions to that, or would anyone like to ask a new question?
I just wanted to say, I really appreciate the comments and yeah, my question was about what you just mentioned, Jan. I think in your presentation, you mentioned it as an investment. And I was wondering if there was, as part of making the case, if there was any thought about making the business case that the return on that investment is not just that the children will have higher achievement, will learn all the skills that they need to learn, but also that liberates the time of women, because most of the people who are doing the child rearing, the caretaking are women, and how that liberates their time and bandwidth and energies to focus on more, income generating. And I was wondering, I mean, we were talking earlier about all of these other countries who are already doing that, and I really wonder if there's any way we can find data in terms of like how is that investment really paying off? That would be great.
Well, in my dreams, we would pilot the plan and monitor it from the start and monitor the benefits and along the 2 tracks that you mentioned. On child development, there's a lot of studies that are done like that, the Heckman stories, etc.
Yeah.
But also the spillovers from the childcare program to the local community, to the mothers, and that has never been done at the same time. But separately, yes. There are studies that show the enormous impact of childcare, the availability of childcare on the local community, both individual and the community. And that's very promising. These cost to benefit ratios are very high. But it would be great to integrate it. And yeah, there will be a business case.
Other questions? Go ahead, Cassandra.
Hi, Cassandra Scarpino from USAID. I'm very intrigued, Jan, around the idea of the 600 hours minimum guaranteed to children, the entitlement. But I wonder from the teacher's perspective, what is the minimum guarantee, also thinking about as a previous teacher, former teacher, we know that a lot of what goes in the classroom, the quality comes also from things that happen outside of the classroom. So preparation, the higher the quality, I will also say the longer the teacher might need to prepare, right? Communication with families. So I wonder in those 600 hours, I mean, how many hours do we guarantee to the teacher? Because I understand that there is the idea of additional hours that could be financed by communities or other mechanism, but I think that also guaranteeing a number of hours to the teachers in addition to what it is guaranteeing classroom instruction might also influence the quality, but also the way that we think about the profession as being something that needs, preparation. And so maybe more of an observation than a question, so I apologize.
True,
Yeah.
One of the reasons that we didn't go to the bottom of saying 2.5 hours, a little bit more, but your question remains very valid, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because if we think about even, here in the United States, there are teachers who do a lot of unpaid work outside of their teaching hours, and not everyone gets a prep hour during the school day to help prepare for their instruction, so it would be a very similar situation in this case. And as we know, like the kinds of skills that have to be taught at that age are actually quite sophisticated, and they're not necessarily natural for all people, so it would require a certain amount of preparation to be able to execute properly. So great point. Other questions?
I'm Albert Motivans. I'm head of data and insights for Equal Measures 2030. So I'm also coming in it from, I have a long experience in education, especially around data, but have recently switched to looking more at gender issues. And I think there really is, as already been mentioned, this opportunity, not just because not because it's sensible, way to expand the landscape a little bit, but because it's an opportunity as well. Because I think if you're looking now at the gendered space, I think the care economy is one of those areas which is really starting to gain momentum. And so it's an opportunity for bringing in these other kind of aspects of, how it contributes to care, and then these synergies as well, right? About then working and pay and so on that affects both sides, and bring that into the equation a bit. Because I think I thought it had been long solved, like with the neurology research and so on, that this was beneficial, right? So nobody needs to make that argument anymore. So it's really about other things, why it's not happening. And I think cost is a big part of it. And I think, and related to that, it's also the data. I think probably Jan to be critical, but I'm a data nerd, so I have to say, I think every chart should say what age group you're talking about, what year you're talking about, and if it's because of the ephemeral nature of this kind of care education, where families will not send their child that day because they don't have money for lunch, so they can't pay for the lunch, so the child stays home. It's not like a school monolithic thing where you can expect the kid to be there all through the school day, every day, and so on. There's a lot more, short-term care and so on. So doing full-time equivalencies, for example, right? What does that really look like? And I'm really shocked. I'm surprised I didn't see that. I don't know if you were the co-author too with Louise, that study about, where do you find young children, and to find so many in primary schools already, and not just in kindergarten classes, but because they're accompanying their older siblings or for whatever reason. I think that, again, thinking about the business case, that there's another argument there about, well, you're making schools more efficient so they can actually, so those children there can do better learning, or so that there isn't such the, increase of, I don't know if you look at the Kenya, I'm sure this is true for many African countries, but first and second grade is when the highest rates of repetition are found. And it's partly because there's inexperienced teachers teaching first and second grade, and also then, all these younger children that are around. So somehow making that case, but I wonder if, if then, school is an actor which is working against that because they're getting sometimes, funding per pupil. And so they're happy to bring the younger siblings in because then that can increase their numbers and of course then make all of these enrollment rates look much higher than they actually are because there's children outside of the age group who are being served. But I think that's like another case, right? Like about, efficiency of formal education system, that takes this burden, I don't want to call it a burden, but this role, saves them from it so that they can, focus on higher order learning and, really learning to read and these practical things, which, the school systems are doing such a poor job of. And I'm sorry, just one last point, then that comes back to costs then, right? Because you made the point about, alignment with primary. I think that's a really hard case to make to a finance minister. Because they'll say, oh, well, but you need 2 teachers for 30 kids. And I'm only paying this primary school teacher one teacher for a class of 30, you need, because of the age group and the need to have more adult presence or whatever, instructor presence. So it kind of makes it more costly than primary education. And primary education is doing such a poor job. I think it's hard to, somehow that case has to be made, well, that's going to take, it's going to make education more efficient, right? That's what you get for your, for that additional cost or something like that. But I think it's a really hard one. And I think I was at a ministerial meeting where, when that was mentioned, that it was the same, someone from the bank had done a study and the cost was exactly the same for a pre-primary or more even for a pre-primary teacher than for a primary teacher. The discussion stopped completely. It didn't go any further than that. So, but I think there's a business case, right, for so many reasons, right, and and the whole learning crisis and so on. That I think that could be made, as part of that kind of business case. But I'm just asking. Just because I'm looking for like the preciseness, and I think that like that study, I'll have to go look for it. You're from RTI, right? Oh, you're not. Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. Sorry. Who was an author in this room? Did you say? Yeah.
Well, I know that Catherine King and Louis Krauss published a lot about inefficiency in primary school and especially at the intersection of preschool and primary school.
Right.
There's a number of studies there. How well are we measuring the enrollment and especially stumbling at the first step?
Right.
I think that's the one you refer to. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Lisa.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a really important part of it and piece of it, and maybe that's what's partly blocking, why this isn't coming on board, why it's not a really clear, clear argument.
I mean, you're right that we don't have the data, right? We don't have the data to make that business case. I mean, the US, the data that's made the strongest case is a longitudinal study that's been for over 40 years, showing if you invest X number of dollars here and we follow them 40 years later, people and it's a whole benefit, not just that they did better in school, but that they're more likely to own a home, more likely to have graduated from high school and college. And so that case was made in the US. And why Head Start has gotten such strong funding in the US is because there was all that data that's shown that, but it's been longitudinal data that started in the 60s. That and how do you replicate something similar? Because in a sense, a lot of the data that's already been shown in Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, has shown that after a few years in primary school, you don't see as strong, you see some of a fade out of some of the skills that children learned. And it may be that we're asking the wrong questions in the data we're collecting. So the question is how do we make sure that we're asking the correct questions and designing our data collection and our research appropriately to really say what really is this return on investment here.
I know that we're getting close to the end of our time. I wanted to just check, make sure that we haven't ignored our online participants. Okay, excellent. And I think just to wrap up, I'll ask one more brief, well, it's not really a brief question, but it's a question for us all to kind of think about for you all to maybe respond to. And I think this conversation has been really helpful in thinking about, what are the many different factors that we need to take into consideration when we're advocating for preschool as a human right? Like, I think, your question around the larger kind of implications and intersection with gender in terms of like ability to, own land in order to have a school and work, right? Like those kind of much bigger picture questions, those are things that we have to take into consideration. The importance of data, obviously, to drive all of these arguments that we're making, to really make a convincing case for preschool as a human right. All of these things are things that we have to take into consideration. So with that in mind, and all of the other wonderful things that you all presented, so if you were going to be meeting with ministries of education or educational stakeholders, and they want to advocate themselves in their country context for universal preschool or preschool as a human right, what kinds of recommendations would you give to them? Where would people start?
I would start with two things. Fundamental right ever since 1948. And the benefits. And then as broad as Linda suggested, the benefits for the child and the spillovers to the local community. And that arguments get stronger the better data we have. Yeah.
So I agree with, obviously it's so context dependent, right, on what's already existing within that country. But for me, it's really, what is your vision around quality? What is your vision around where do you want people to be in 20 years? And then how are you going to get there? And really then thinking, starting from that vantage point, really thinking about, okay, this is how we're going to help you get there. And that's your steps that you can take in terms of creating that shared vision, creating that standards and framework, creating multiple pathways for teachers to get the education they need. How do we get funding for teachers? I really think you have to, for me, quality is everything, right? And that's how we're going to support every child to thrive. And so I really focus on improving quality.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to both of our presenters. Thank you so much to everyone who attended in person and online. And thank you for SID for hosting this, of course. I want to ask Linda, my co-chair, if she has any final comments or thoughts, or Malavika from SID, if you would like to add anything.
I think I'll just add that we again, extending the thank you to all of you for being here, for our speakers and Carol for moderating, and a recording of this and other materials will be sent out very shortly. So everyone that's registered should have access to them. You'll receive resources from Jan and Susan, and we'll also have an event survey go out. So please let us know how we did. We do take a lot of your recommendations in, and so if you would be interested in attending more events with us, you will see your recommendations reflected in our future events as well. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks for everybody.